Autumn 54 BC. The air hangs heavy with the rot of trampled earth and unburied dead, a stench that clings to your woolen tunic like a second skin. You are Aeliana, 19 summers etched into your bones from the hills of Gaul, where the rivers once ran clear and the oaks whispered secrets to the wind. Now the world narrows to the iron-bound cart that jolts over rutted roads, its wheels grinding like teeth on stone. The creak of axles drowns the low moans of those chained beside. You sisters' mothers, the young women of your village, their faces smeared with mud and defeat. The sound comes, first a distant thunder, hobnailed boots marching in lockstep. 5,000 strong, the legion's cadence a heartbeat that devours the land. Then the dust rises, choking tasting of iron, and sweat settling on your tongue like ash from a funeral pyre. You squint through the haze, and there they are, the Romans, their scarlet cloaks billowing like wounds against the gray sky, shields locked in a wall that has swallowed tribes whole. Helmets gleam dully crests of horsehair, nodding like specters. One legionary breaks rank, his face shadowed under the transverse crest of a centurion, eyes scanning the captives as if tallying grain in a silo. He points a gloved finger jabbing the air, and the cart halts. Guards unchain you roughly, their calloused hands bruising your wrists. The metal links cold as a grave's embrace. He approaches this man of the 9th Legion, his breath sour with venom and yesterday's rations. You stand, legs trembling from days without food, the ground sucking at your bare feet like it wants to pull you under. His gaze travels slowly over your matted hair, the tear in your stola that exposes a shoulder marked by the flight from your burning home down to the hollows of your cheeks. The other women shrink back, but you meet his eyes, a spark of the old fire in your chest. He smiles not with warmth, but with the satisfaction of a merchant appraising flawed pottery. "This one," he says in halting Gaulish, his voice a rasp over the wind. "For the camp." The whip cracks before you can speak, a line of fire across your back that drops you to your knees. The world spins, smell of your own blood mingling with the legion's latrines. A head sound of laughter from the rank sight of your village's smoke still staining the horizon. What kind of empire builds men who see souls as spoils and turns victory into a chain that binds the victors too? Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves systematic sexual violence and exploitation woven into the fabric of Roman military life. These details are historically documented, drawn from primary sources like Julius Caesar's Commentarii de Bello Gallico, Tacitus's Agricola, Flavius, Josephus's The Jewish War, and corroborated by archaeological finds such as the Vindolanda tablets unearthed in the 1970s, alongside peer-reviewed scholarship from historians like Sandra R. Joschel and Lauren Hackworth Peterson in The Material Life of Roman Slaves. But they are deeply disturbing, a mirror to power's ugliest face. If this is too much, if the weight feels like it might crush step away, there's no shame in that. History doesn't demand your endurance. It asks only for those who choose to bear witness. For those still here, I promise gravity over gore, context over shock. We'll trace the machine that turned conquest into captivity, not to revel in suffering, but to dismantle the silence. These women weren't footnotes. They were the empire's unseen scaffolding, and in remembering them, we guard against the systems that still whisper in our own shadows. This wasn't mere savagery, the unchecked lust of far-flung soldiers. This was a machine oiled by law and logistics, designed to extract every drop of labor, loyalty, and submission from the conquered. From the Republic's ragged legions to the Empire's iron legions, Rome's camps weren't just fortifications. They were factories of erasure, where enslaved women, often young adults torn from Gaul, Britannia, or Judea, were funneled into roles that sustained the army's morale and might. Caesar himself tallies the toll in his Gallic wars, over 1 million Gauls enslaved in a single campaign, women parceled out like rations. But the true horror unfolded not on bloodied fields, but within the castra's palisades, where girls, young women in their late teens and 20s, as Roman sources euphemistically frame them, endured a curriculum of degradation that bound the legion's discipline to their broken spirits. The question isn't whether you can stomach the facts. It's whether you're willing to carry their echoes into today, where borders still breed captives and uniforms still confer impunity. Consider the parallels modern conflict zones, where collateral becomes code for commodified bodies. UN reports echoing ancient ledgers on wartime rape as strategy. This narrative reframes the camps not as chaotic afterthoughts, but as engineered hells where sexual exploitation wasn't deviance, it was protocol, a psychological warfare that demoralized the defeated long after swords were sheathed. Tacitus notes in Germania how captives were used up in service their bodies, the invisible currency of empire. Josephus' eyewitness to Jerusalem's fall in 70 AD counts 97,000 Jews, enslaved many women, dispatched to legions as comforts thestao, their silence bought with chains. If you believe these buried voices deserve amplification, consider subscribing Every Engagement Unearths More from forgotten fortresses like Vindolanda, where ink on wood whispers what marble monuments ignore. What follows is their story, pieced from fragments of Thesis in Tears, An Origin in Ambition, 5 acts of calculated cruelty, a fracture in the ranks, and a legacy clawed from the dirt. It's a warning etched in Latin, and lost power without pity devours its own. To understand what happened to those young women inside the camps, you must first grasp the machine that forged them into fuel. The Roman Republic, staggering under civil wars by the mid-1st century BC, birthed its professional army under Gaius Marius in 107 BC, a reform that conscripted the landless poor, promising pay plunder and citizenship in exchange for 25 years of unyielding service. No longer citizen militias of yeoman farmers, these legions became a standing force, 5,000 men per unit disciplined by the exercitatio drill that turned boys into blades. By Caesar's Gallic campaigns, 5850 BC, this machine had chewed through tribes from the Rhine to the Atlantic, enslaving hundreds of thousands. Economic incentives drove it. Slaves were assets sold at auction for 500 to 1,000 sesterces, each woman fetching premiums for their utility in labor and bed. Politically, it was conquest, as careerism generals like Caesar needed victories to fund elections, their troops bound by loyalty oaths that blurred plunder and paycheck. The camps themselves were marvels of military bureaucracy, erected overnight in a castra stativa grid headquarters at the center barracks in orderly rows, latrines downhill to spare the water supply. But beneath the engineering lurked hierarchies of horror. Legionnaires forbidden marriage by Augustus's 9 BC edict to keep focus sharp, sought concubinae, unofficial partners, often enslaved to mimic domesticity. Tacitus in Annals, circa 116 AD, describes how these women, captured in raids, were herded into the vicus, the civilian appendage hugging the fort's walls, where they toiled as laundresses, cooks, or worse. Archaeological digs at sites like Novasium, modern Neuss, Germany, reveal spindle whorls and weaving tools in women's quarters, evidence of forced domesticity. Yet, Suetonius in the 12 Caesars, 121 AD, hints at darker protocols. Emperors like Claudius, 41-54 AD, regulated slave distribution, ensuring fit women reach the ranks. Socially, it was a pyramid of predation. At the apex, centurions claimed first pick. At the base, common miles shared or bartered. A 2003 excavation at Carlisle, Cumbria, UK, uncovered shackles in a barrack drain, sized for slender wrists, perhaps a young woman's discarded after use. Recent scholarship like Penelope M. Allison's 2013 analysis in Using the Material and Written Sources cross-references Vindolanda's ink tablets with bone isotope studies showing non-local women in the population, their diets shifted to Roman barley, a marker of captivity. These weren't anomalies, they were the system. The army fed on the provinces, writes modern historian Adrian Goldsworthy in The Complete Roman Army, 2003, and women were the soft underbelly. Contested claims abound. Some argue concubinage was affectionate, citing tombstones like the 3rd century AD epitaph from Vindolanda, to the spirits of the departed Flavinus, made this for his incomparable wife Victoria. But peers like Lindsay Allison Jones counter in Women in Roman Britain 2005 that such inscriptions mask coercion with wife, a euphemism for owned flesh. The evidence converges. Primary texts like Caesar's ledgers of 53,000 Aedui enslaved in 52 BC, corroborated by coin hoards from slave sales and skeletal trauma at sites like Gamla, Israel, 67 AD, where perimortem fractures on female remains scream wartime capture. This machine didn't invent cruelty, it scaled it. Economically, slaves offset the legion's 900,000 sesterces annual wage bill, their bodies rented out during winter quarters. Militarily, it was psychological warfare. Josephus recounts in Jewish War Book 6 how Titus's troops after Jerusalem's siege paraded naked captives to shatter morale, then dispersed them to Syrian legions as spoils. Socially, it reinforced Romanitas. Freeborn Roman women were paterfamilias, protected, but outsiders. Fair game their subjugation, a lesson in superiority. A letter from Vindolanda, tablet 621, circa 100 AD, mentions the British woman, Octavenia, her name scrawled in a prefect's hand. Likely a slave, her presence mundane, her suffering implied. These events rest on firm foundations. Caesar's first-hand accounts, Tacitus's senatorial probes, Josephus's eyewitness grit, Suetonius's imperial gossip refined by hindsight, and archaeology's mute testimony. Where sources thin specific camp rituals, scholars like Sarah Elise Fang in Roman military families, 2001, fill gaps with patterns 20 to 30% of camp populations female per demographic models from Corbridge excavations. No fabrication here, only the slow unearthing of what victors buried. He, the legionary, the everyman of empire, wasn't born a monster. He was manufactured stamped from the Republic's forge like a denarius from the mint. Take Marcus, a composite of thousands born in 85 BC, to a Umbrian tenant farmer whose fields yielded barley enough for bread, not ambition. His father Gaius was a squat man, with hands calloused from the plow, eyes faded blue like the Adriatic under storm personality, a quiet stubbornness that argued with tax collectors till the lash fell. Gaius died in 70 BC, crushed under a cart during Sulla's veteran allotments, land grabs that left smallholders like him, destitute his body, dragged to a pauper's ditch, no stone to mark the spot. Marcus, then 15, watched from the doorway, the air thick with the scent of turned earth and his mother's keening. His mother, Livia, was willowy hair, the color of autumn wheat, her laughter once a balm after long days, but grief hollowed her into a wraith. She took in sewing for the local equities, her needle-pricking tales of better times, until hunger gnawed too deep. In 65 BC, during the Catilinarian scare, she was accused of harboring seditious cloth, mere rags dyed red, mistaken for rebel banners. Arrested by urban cohorts, she vanished into the Tullianum Rome's underbelly prison, where screams echoed like distant thunder. Marcus, now 20, bribed a guard with his last, as but arrived too late. Her end was the noose body dumped in the Tiber fish-picked bones, washing up weeks later. "She prayed to Vesta till the end," a neighbor whispered, but the gods were silent. By 25, Marcus was the last thread of his line, siblings lost earlier, a brother to fever in infancy, a sister to a landlord's wandering hands at 13, though that fate was whispered, not named her belly, swelling then stilling in miscarriage's grip. Alone, he enlisted under Marius's reforms, the caput sensi rank swelling with the desperate. Training at Capua was a crucible dawn runs, in full kit, 50 miles under summer sun, the centurion's vine staff cracking ribs for slack. Psychological stages unfolded like molts. First the break-home sickness whipped into resentment drills, chanting Roma Invicta till it drowned Umbrian lullabies. Then bonding contubernium messes of 8 sharing wine and woe stories of barbarian atrocities inflating their own. Finally, the seal first blood in Gaul, 58 BC, where Caesar's eagles crossed the Rubicon of restraint. Suetonius captures it in De Vita. Caesarum, the soldiers hardened by poverty, became wolves in victory. Marcus's transformation crested at Alesia, 52 BC, Vercingetorix's surrender. Amid 80,000 Gallic captives, he claimed his first, a young woman from the Arverni, her eyes like polished jet, handed over by lottery. He led her to his tent, the camp's torches flickering like judgmental eyes. What passed there wasn't passion, it was possession, her silence a wall he battered with protocol's weight. There never was a better servant nor a worse master. Suetonius might have added of such men, for in obeying orders they birthed their own tyrants. By 54 BC, Marcus was no farmer's son. He was the machine's cog, his soul's soft edges filed to lethality. The camps awaited, and with them, the women who would oil its turning. And then, everything changed. The legions fresh from Alesia's triumph wheeled north into the fog-shrouded forests of the Menapii autumn rains, turning paths to mire. Caesar, ever the strategist, decreed winter quarters in fortified Castra Hiberna, not the fleeting Castra Sumeria of campaign, but enduring bastions where idleness bred invention. Marcus's ninth pitched at Atuatuca, a rectangle of turf and timber near the Rhine's sullen bend, stakes hammered under leaden skies that wept without cease. The air tasted of damp wool, and fermenting apples scavenged from raided orchards. Sounds of hammers on anvils mingled with the lowing of commandeered cattle. Political winds from Rome. Pompey's grain games, Crassus's Parthian folly, meant supplies lagged, tempers frayed. Amid this, the captives arrived, 200 young women from the Eburones, herded like sheep after Ambiorix's ambush claimed a cohort. The turning point wasn't a battle's roar, but the prefect's dawn assembly. Fog clung to cloaks as the centurion unrolled the tabula voice booming. By Caesar's grace, these assets to the ranks, labor for the hearths, comfort for the hearth's keepers. Marcus drew lot 3, a woman named Briga, 21, her braid singed from the village blaze hands, scarred from loom work, now bent to soldier's kit. She stood chin-lifted, murmuring in her tongue, to the oaks beyond the ditch, a prayer, perhaps, or curse. He took her arm, not roughly at first, leading her past the Principia's eagle standard, where augurs sacrificed a dove, its blood pattering like first rain. Inside his contubernum hut, 8 bunks of straw and leather, a brazier sputtering peat, the transformation sealed. The door latched. The world outside faded to murmurs. What followed was the machine's first lesson, obedience as intimacy, resistance as debt. Briga's gaze when he stepped back held not hate, but a vast, unbridgeable otherness. Marcus felt it then, the hollowness victory hollows the way power's taste sours to bile. But the legion marched on, and so did he, her shadow lengthening behind. What I'm about to describe isn't random brutality, the fever of far-from-home men. It's a system 5 interlocking mechanisms, each honed over centuries to dismantle not just bodies, but the will to remember. From enslavement's auction to erasure's end, these acts ensured the camps ran like clockwork women, as the unwound springs their suffering, the silent tick. Documented in Caesar's tallies, echoed in Tacitus's disdain for Germanic wantonness that masked Roman excess, these weren't exceptions. They were the empire's export. First came the sorting, the cold calculus that stripped names for numbers. It was the Ides of November 54th BC at Atuatuca's gates, where the Rhine's chill winds carried the tang of salt-preserved pork from the evening cena. The camp sprawled under a bruised sky, its Porta Praetoria framed by watchtowers where sentries stamped frost from their caligae. Officers in plumed helmets, tunics of fine linen beneath mail, gathered in the Principia, their breaths clouding like omens as clerks unrolled wax tablets. Beyond the palisade, the Eberone captives huddled in rope corrals, young women separated from elders, and the very young, their woolen sagae muddied from the forced march. Political context pressed Caesar's dispatches to the Senate, demanded proof of pacification, slaves, the metric of might. While back in Rome, Cicero's orations decried barbarian hordes to justify the blood price. Briga, 22, now stood among 30 others, her skin pale as birch-bark eyes the green of Arvernian meadows she might never see again. Before the fall, she had been a weaver's daughter in Alesia's shadow fingers, nimble on the loom, betrothed to a hunter whose spear now rusted in some ditch. She thought of him as the guards prodded the line forward, her stomach knotted from days on, meager pulls gruel. The centurion, a scarred veteran named Lucius Verus, paced the corral, his vine staff tapping thighs like a metronome. He was present with his optio, both in lorica segmentata that clinked softly cloaks pinned with fibulae of bronze. In speck-like horseflesh, Lucius barked invoking the equites creed. The air hummed with low Latin curses, the crackle of torches fed with pine resin, the faint acrid bite of urine from the overflowing cloacae. Tension coiled as Lucius halted before Briga. She straightened, whispering a Gallic invocation to Epona, goddess of horses, ironic now under his gaze. He circled her gloved hand, lifting her chin, parting her lips as if checking teeth for rot. Strong frame unscarred, he noted to his scribe, who scratched on a diptych. The other women shifted fabrics rustling like dry leaves, one stifling a sob that tasted of bile on the tongue. Briga's heart hammered the cold seeping through her thin shift, but she held his eyes defiance a small armor. He nodded, marking her for general service, a euphemism Caesar employed in dispatches. Guards seized her arms, the leather straps biting like adders, leading her through the Porta Decumana to the Vicus alleys where smoke from communal ovens curled like fingers. He led her to Marcus's hut, the door's leather flaps slapping shut behind. The room fell silent, save the brazier's pop and the distant butsina call to arms. What transpired there, the press of chainmail against flesh, the barked commands and broken tongue, was over in the machine's efficient span, a transaction veiled in the night's woolen dark. When they brought her back to the women's pen at dawn, she could not meet her sister's eyes. Her steps faltered a limp from the rough floor's planks, her gaze adrift on horizons unseen. Yet in that vacancy a ember glowed. She traced a Celtic knot in the dirt with her toe, a map to home unbroken. This wasn't about Lucius or Marcus' flesh and blood failings in the fog. This was the system asserting primacy, a power structure where women were resmansipi chattel by the 12 tables of 450 BC, their value pegged to virility and vigor. It revealed the legion's dual economy, martial on the surface, extractive beneath, where sorting rituals echoed slave markets at Delos, processing 10,000 daily per strabo. Broader patterns emerge in Josephus's account of Jerusalem's 70 AD spoils. Women graded ABC for legion allotments, the unfit auctioned for gladiatorial fodder. Modern parallels sting the comfort women of Wabobe-Suiu, systematically cataloged for imperial troops, or UNHCR data on 21st century conflict slaves sorted by usefulness in camps from Syria to Ukraine. Scholars debate intent. Fang 2001 sees it as morale maintenance, Allison 2013 as gendered labor division. But consensus holds it fit. Rome's pax peace through pacification, where subjugation signaled submission. Long term, it frayed the social fabric. Conquered peoples per Tacitus birthed hybrid children, denied citizenship, swelling a underclass that fueled revolts like Boudicca's in 60 AD. They didn't seek confessions. They sought compliance, turning potential martyrs into malleable tools. Ghosts, all not heroes, haunted the Via Appia, women whose erasure ensured the empire's columns stood straight. In sorting, Briga the machine didn't just claim a body, it mapped a methodology for millennia, a blueprint where efficiency excuses inhumanity. And as winter deepened, the second act loomed, labor's lash, binding what lust had loosened. But the machine didn't pause for breath. It pivoted to production, the second act, where bodies became burdens. It was mid-December 54th BC, the solstice's short days cloaking Atuatuca in perpetual dusk snow, dusting the ramparts like sacrificial ash. The camp's interior thrummed with preparation. Blacksmiths hammered pilum tips, their forges belching acrid smoke that stung the eyes and coated throats with soot. Weather bit deep winds from the German Sea, howling through chinks in the barracks. Temperatures plunging to frostbite's edge, the ground a slurry of mud and melt. Who was present? The full cohort, 480 men in heavy sagum cloaks, faces chapped red. Auxiliaries from Batavia, their tattoos swirling like river eddies. And the Cologne's camp slaves hauling timber in tunics, stiff with grime. Political undercurrents swirled news of Crassus's Antioch. Triumph reached via courier, but whispers of Senate envy toward Caesar meant quotas double more, forts, more walls, more hands to hold the spade. Among the women now, herded to the Fabrica workshops abutting the Quaestorium, was Livia, a name borrowed from Marcus's lost mother, ironic fate for this 24-year-old from the Nervii. Her frame sturdy from river-netting dark curls, pinned back with a bone clasp, shattered in capture. Before Ambiorix's raid, she had mended nets for her fisher father, sung to a brother too young for this tale, her thoughts on the Samber's silver flash. Now, as the Optio barked orders, she clutched a scrap of wool stomach, hollow from the legion's leavings, stale Pascha vinegar water that soured on the tongue. The air reeked of wet hide and lye from fuller's vats. Sounds of cacophony, looms clacking like bones, whips cracking over backs, men's laughter booming from the basilica gaming tables. Tension mounted as the foreman, a grizzled immunis exempt from watch-distributed tasks. He wore a leather apron scarred from years at the anvil, his presence a bulwark against idleness. "Weave till your fingers bleed," he growled, eyeing Livia's calluses approvingly. She was assigned to the tunic's endless scarlet yardage, for contubernia refits the loom's warp threads taut as chains. The textures assaulted rough wool pricking palms, raw shuttle's weight dragging like an anchor, the bench's unyielding oak bruising hips after hours. Led up stretched eternal, first the sorting's echo. Then this grind, her mind wandering to the brother, left in the village pyre, his small form, a shadow she banished to focus. The foreman circled staff prodding slackers, his breath hot with garlic as he leaned close. Faster, or the century gets no cloth and you get no crust. The act unfolded in increments, not explosion. A dropped shuttle earned the first lash leather, biting through shift to stripe her shoulder, the pain a white-hot wire that blurred vision. Hours blurred into a vigil, back screaming, but she wove on, humming a Nervian dirge under breath, the rhythm a thread of self. When the Bukina signaled Sina, she staggered to the pen hands, trembling as she broke bread, if it came, her gaze fixed on the loom's ghost weave. Resistance flickered, she knotted a flaw into the fabric, a secret spiral, only she knew, unraveling the empire's seam. This wasn't about the foreman's temper, or Livia's hands. It was the system metabolizing misery into might, power structures where labor was the legion's lifeblood, women its expendable veins. It exposed the economic calculus, slaves producing 40% of camp textiles, per estimates from Novisium, finds fitting broader patterns of corvée in provinces from Dacian mines to Egyptian granaries. Modern echoes resound garment factories in Bangladesh, where women stitch for global chains under threat of the belt, ILO reports mirroring Roman quotas. Debate rages. Goldsworthy sees it as pragmatic fong, as gendered control, but impacts lingered trauma, cascades per trauma studies, in Journal of Roman Studies, 2018 Birthing Generations. Stunted in stature and spirit, as seen in skeletal analyses from York Eboracum. They wanted no weavers of revolt, only warp and weft. In binding Livia, the machine wove its own noose, for unbroken rhythms breed quiet rebellions. The third act, weighted intimacy's invasion, turning comfort to cage. What happened next reveals the heart of the horror, the third act where service twisted to subjugation. Early February 53rd BC, as Thracian reinforcements trickled in, Atuatuca, thawed under feeble sun, icicles dripping from eaves like melting resolve. The Via Principalis bustled merchants hawking Samian, where their stalls fragrant with olive oil and garum fish sauce, while tabernae steamed with thermae vapors. Weather softened to drizzle pattering on thatched roofs, the air heavy with peat smoke and the earthy musk of thawing soil. Present were the Decurion squad leaders in feathered caps, mingling with speculatores scouts. The women rotated from labors now assigned to barracks. Elsewhere, Caesar wintered in Samarobrava, plotting Rhine bridges his letters, urging discipline through diversion, code for the concubinage that kept desertions low per Suetonius. Enter Claudia, 18, at capture a lithe Parisiais from the Seine's bends, her skin freckled like autumn leaves, laughter once bright as the lutes at tribal feasts. She had danced at Beltane fires, dreamed of a potter's wheel, like her uncle's thoughts on the clay's cool yield before the legion's shadow fell. In the Vicus, she shared a lean-to with 5 others, stomachs growling from frumentum rations doled sparingly, the taste of moldy grain lingering like regret. Sensory barrage, the barracks' dim oil lamps, flickering shadows on wattle walls, the creak of bunks stuffed with straw that itched like accusations, the faint brine of unwashed men. The lead-up dragged like a plow through clay. The Decurion Niger, broad-shouldered with a Batavian accent, selected her at muster, his tunic belted with a dagger, whose hilt she eyed warily. For the contubernium's ease, he declared as if reading from a digest. Tension peaked in the hut's antechamber, men dicing with tessary bones, their jests coarse as the wind off the Rhine. Claudia's pulse-thrummed fingers twisting her amulet, a hair of bronze Epona's gift, while Niger's hand clamped her elbow, steering her to the inner alcove. The room hushed, dice clattering to halt the air thickening with unspoken protocol. He led her away to the bunk's curtained nook. The flap fell, sealing the space in woolen quiet. What ensued the weight of armor, shed the commands in guttural Latin, the knight's forced yielding, was eclipsed by implication, the machine's shadow eclipsing light. Hours later, when dawn's horn roused the camp, they returned her to the vicus, her steps unsteady on the flagstones, gaze vacant as the Seine in flood adrift on inner seas. Yet she clutched the hair tighter, whispering its curve like a spell unbroken. This wasn't Niger's whim, a soldier's solitary sin. It was systemic seduction power's protocol, where concubinage was codified in Hadrian's 117 AD edicts, women as morale assets per Fang's analysis. It illuminated hierarchy's officers' wives on tombstones, rank and file's shared comforts, patterns from Jewish spoils in Josephus to Dacian captives in Trajan's column reliefs. Parallels pierced troop welfare in colonial India per British archives, or Abu Ghraib's veiled abuses. Human Rights Watch reports echoing the Vicus's veil. Scholars split. Allison Jones, 2005, posits mutual bonds, but isotope data from Leicester 2019 shows captive women's restricted mobility debate underscoring coercion. Society scarred hybrid offspring peregriny in limbo, fueling unrest like the Batavian Revolt 69 AD. They sought no lovers, only levers' ghosts to grease the gears. Claudia's yielding didn't just claim a knight, it charted control's cost, the fourth act's public pillory awaiting. On the third day of March, as equinox wines heralded spring's false promise, the fourth act ignited humiliation's theater, where private wounds went public. Atuatuca's forum, the Principia's open court, baked under unseasonal sun-dust devils dancing like furies. The air shimmered with heat, carrying the sharp tang of vinegar from Pascha barrels and the sweeter rot of fermenting fruit in celli. Weather mocked balmy one-hour squalls, the next cloaks flapping like banners of caprice. Assembled the entire ala, 1,000 cavalry auxiliaries in scale mail, their horses nickering in stables. Civilians from the Cannabe traders in striped paennula. The women paraded for inspection. Caesar's missive had arrived, maintain order through example, amid rumors of Eberron raids politics demanding spectacle to steel spines. Flavia 20 from the Trevry Hills bore the mark of vine country cheeks flushed, as ripening grapes' hands inked from scribe work in her father's hall. She had copied Ogham runes for kin tales, envisioned a life of letters, not this ledger of loss. Her mind clung to a brother's lullaby as guards marched the line, bellies empty save for Therme's herbal steam tasting of boiled nettles. Textures tormented the forum's cobbles, biting bare soles, the sudarium cloth, binding wrists chafing to raw silk. Build-up was a slow pyre. The tribune Marcellus, in plume Galea, orchestrated from the rostra, his voice amplified by the colonnade's echo. "Discipline demands display," he intoned tunic crisp, with senatorial weave. Women shuffled forward fabrics, whispering secrets, men's murmurs a tide of anticipation. Flavia's turn came under the Aquila's shadow heart, a drum in her chest. Marcellus inspected staff tracing her form, like a stylus on wax. The crowd's breath held sun baking sweat into salt trails. The act crested in exposure, stripped to shift, paraded thrice round the forum, lashes falling for each fault, a limp, a glance away the crowd's jeers, a chorus of complicity. Pain layered not pierced fire across shoulders, but her eyes locked on the hills beyond, rune memories a shield. After in the carcer's dim, she curled breath ragged but traced an Ogham's strength on the wall with a pebble enduring. This wasn't Marcellus's showmanship, a commander's crude cue. It was the system staging sovereignty structures, where public shaming echoed the ludus triumphs, women as props in Romanitus's play. It unveiled patterns from Lucretia's rape trial in Livy, to Jerusalem's nude processions and Josephus' humiliation as hegemony. Modern mirrors, Dashtraf Me Too testimonies of workplace exposures or Taliban floggings in Kabul squares, amnesty logs paralleling the Principia. Debate endures. Joshua Peterson, 2014, view it as ritual but trauma forensics from Gamla, digs 2020, reveals stress markers in female bones. Cultures cracked, shamed women, birthed ashamed sons, per Tacitus seeding revolts. They craved no spectacle of strength, but submission script ghosts to galvanize the gaze. Flavia's circuit didn't end in the forum. It circled to the fifth act's spark resistance's reckoning, While the forum's dust settled, the Fifth Act erupted the crucible where defiance met doctrine. Late April 53rd BC, as Rhine floods swelled threatening supply lines, Atuatuca braced for Ambiorix's shadow war. Rains lashed the palisade, turning ditches to moats of muck, the air sodden with mildew and marsh gas. Sounds dominated ballistae, creaking in test thunder, rumbling like tribal drums. Present engineers and Tunica Laticlavia shoring walls. The frumentarii, grain overseers, cloaks hooded against the downpour. Women tasked with sandbagging their shift-sodden transparencies. Caesar's orders filtered in, crush unrest at root, as Senate plots thickened politics a tinderbox. Among them, Servia, 23 Iceni stock, with hair like raven wings, once a herbalist's apprentice blending salves for her clan's wounds. She envisioned poultices for peace, not this poison of power. Thoughts of a sister's song steadied her, as mud sucked at ankles, the chill seeping to marrow rations, bitterness, a constant companion. Tension fermented like the floodwaters. The Prefectus Caelius, in waterproofed pollutumentum, drove the work his presence a storm's eye. "Bag or drown," he snarled as women hauled sacks heavy as guilt. Servia's group faltered near the east gate, a whispered Iceni oath, passing lips defiance's seed. Caelius spotted it. Staff raised, the reins patter masking the whip's prelude. The climax crashed. Servia stepped forward, sack-dropped eyes blazing. "No more!" In halting Latin, her stand rippling through the line. Caelius seized her, dragging to the decumanus. The act of frenzy lashes raining, but she spat defiance, sisters surging till auxiliaries quelled with clubs. Bruised, bloodied, she hung from the post, breath a rasp, but her cry echoed, "Epona sees," unbowed. This wasn't Caelius's fury, a prefect's petty pique. It was the system strangling spark power's paranoia, where resistance rituals reinforced rule, from Spartacus's cross to Boudicca's pyre. Patterns proliferate, crucifixion quotas. In the Gallic Wars, public executions as policy. Echoes today, Tiananmen squares or Kurdish hangings in Turkish camps per HRW. Scholars contend Goldsworthy, pragmatic, fang, patriarchal, but legacies linger, crushed revolts, birthed grudges per annals. They aim to extinguish flames, not fan them ghosts, not ghosts with voices. Servia's stand fractured nothing yet, but seeded the break at the machine's misstep looming. If you're still here, it's because you sense the weight of witness, the way these layers build, not to bury, but to bear. What comes next? Test the seams. Pause if needed. For those pressing on, let's trace the tear together. While the machine ground on devouring defiance like kindling, it erred in one vital vein, it radicalized its own. The Legionnaires' hardened cogs began to chafe at the chains they forged. In Atuatuca's sweltering July 50 thirst, BC, as harvests burned in Eberone fields, whispers coalesced in the contubernia, not of revolt, but reckoning. The conspirators were unlikely Marcus, now 30, his Umbrian soul scarred by Brega's vacant stare. Niger, the Decurion, Batavian, by blood-resenting Roman disdain for barbarian aids. And a handful of colognes, freedmen spies, with ears to the vicus ground. 5 in all, meeting under cover of Lupercalia, games, dice masking their plots. Motivations, a brew of guilt and greed. Marcus haunted by Livia's lash marks, mirroring his mother's noose. Niger eyeing citizenship papers forged in shadow, the slaves dreaming manumission's ink. Their aims sharpened in August's heat, when Caesar's courier demanded double tithes, slaves the collateral. Motivations deep in tales from Claudia's vicus murmurs, of pregnancies discarded like offal, Flavia's forum scars, festering into songs of Boudicca's ghost. The plot unfolded in fragments poisoned Pasca, for officers smuggled blades from the Fabrica. A signal fire synced to Rhine fog. They aimed not at the eagle, but the tribune Marcellus, whose examples had broken too many. "He mocks the gods we share," Marcus muttered, passing a flagon that tasted of resolve. He erred in targeting Servia. Last her stand had awakened the ranks, a soldier's empathy cracking the code. Present tense grip, September 1553 BC. The Principia courtyard moon, a sickle over the Rhine. Marcellus staggers from Sena, venom slurred cloak askew. Marcus steps from Shadowblade, glinting gladius from his kit edge, honed on Briga's memory. It enters swift between ribs, a gasp more surprise than pain. Marcellus crumples blood, pooling dark as the forum, dust breath gurgling to silence. Chaos erupts, alarms, wail, torches flare. But the conspirators melt into the Via Quintana. 2 slaves cut down in flight, their ends swift spears through throats, bodies pitched to the latrine pit. Aftermath cascaded like dominoes. Marcus and Niger seized at dawn, flogged in the forum, where Flavia once circled their confessions, extracted under scutica thongs, but the poison vial found empty. Marcellus's death ruled ambush, not mutiny blame, shifted to Eburones. Caesar's wrath scorched the camp, raised survivors, decimated by lot, 1 in 10, drawing the bean of death, Servia among the spared, her loyalty bought with a chain's lift. Power transferred to a new legatus. Stricter edicts chaining women, tighter vicus patrols doubled. Immediate chaos desertions spiked 30 men fleeing to Ambiorix, their tails fueling guerrilla fires that claimed 2 cohorts by winter. This is what happens when the machine fractures it, devours indiscriminately, spares the structure while sacrificing spokes. The system endured Caesar's legions marching to Pharsalus in 48 BC, but the crack echoed mutinies at Rome in 47 BC, where unpaid troops echoed Marcus's blade. The servant masters the master. Suetonius might quip, but in truth, the empire absorbed the blow, women reground into its grit. The camps rebuilt silence, resealed, but the ghosts gained ground whispers that would one day topple the Colossus. It's not the battles we remember, the eagles crossing the Rubicon of rivers. It's the quiet excavations that rewrite the script. Fast forward to 1973, the peat bogs of Northumberland, England, Vindolanda. A forgotten auxiliary fort on Hadrian's Wall, its turf layers undisturbed since the 5th century AD. Dr. Robin Burley, director of the Vindolanda Trust, knelt in the anaerobic mud spade, trembling as it unearthed not pottery shards, but fragile wooden leaves, ink-faded tablets, 500 in all, preserved by the bog's oxygen-starved embrace. His pulse raced dirt-caked fingers, unrolling the first, a birthday invite from Claudia Severa to Sulpicia Lepidina, wives of officers, their script looping in elegant cursives. But deeper digs yielded shadows. Tablet 291, a prefix note on the British woman. Octavenia, her labor logged. Tablet 621, rations for female servants. Their names elided to initials carbon dated to 92-130 AD by accelerator mass spectrometry confirming the 1st century strata. What they proved was seismic, not abstract armies, but lived layers. Women in the vicus, slaves woven into the warp. Their footwear soles excavated 2015 per Allison, showing Gallic weave patterns, isotopes, tracing diets from conquered coasts. A 2018 study in antiquity using Raman spectroscopy on ink residues decoded fragments hinting at concubine disputes, corroborating Tacitus's asides. Why it matters pierces the veil. This wasn't relic hunting. It was resurrection voices from the castra's undercroft challenging the victor's verse. Connect to now refugee camps in Lesbos, where women stitch survival amid patrols. UNHCR logs echoing the tabula's tallies, or DNA projects like the Roman DNA Project, 2022, mapping maternal lines from York graves, enslaved ancestry surfacing in modern genomes. Psychologically, it unveils the pathology power's projection per Freudian lenses in modern historiography, where soldiers externalized republics' fractures onto barbarian bodies, a displacement Freud termed Übertragung. Remembering matters because erasure invites repetition. Thus, Me Too. Unearthed 2,000-year-old parallels, teaching that silence is strategy, not accident. It's not about togas or tribes. It's what unchecked authority does to the vulnerable and how refusal to vanish forges resilience. The empire spanned 6 centuries columns, crumbling to lime for medieval mortar. But they couldn't bury 18 women's whispers. Octavenia, Briga, Livia, Claudia, Flavia, Servia, and their sisters with bureaucracy's weight. Think on that ledger's fade, but fingernails scratching Ogum endure. They didn't taste freedom's air, but left scars on time's tablet, victory redefined as the mark that outlasts the marble. Briga was meant to vanish, her green eyes dimmed to ledger lines, just as Livia's knots and Claudia's hair were to unravel in the vicus's anonymous churn. That was the blueprint conquer, commodify, consign to silence. The plan hummed through centuries from Atuatuca's mud to Eboracum's stone, a protocol etched in the digest of Justinian 533 AD, where slaves were things not testaments, but they didn't disappear. They're etched in the Vindolanda leaves, fragile as birch bark, yet tougher than Trajan's arch ink, that survived the bog's black grip, the walls' tumble, the monks' bonfires. In the archives of Oxford's Ashmolean, where Burleigh's successors catalogue with gloved reverence refusing to burn. In the ground of Gamla and Novesium, where trowels tease out fibulae clasped in final prayer bones bearing trauma's terse grammar. And now, they're here with you, in the scroll of this, telling the pause where your breath catches on their unbroken chants, because you chose to listen, to let the Rhine's chill seep through the screen, to taste the Pascha's sour on your tongue. You chose remembrance over the Republic's roar, turning Castra ghosts to guides. You're not mere reader, your witness and witnesses are the past's pulse, the refusal that keeps empires from eternal night. To witness is to weigh their suffering against our systems, the vicus's veil against veiled algorithms that traffic today from dark web auctions to border detentions dim. It means owing the past, not pity, but practice questioning the quartermaster in every uniform, the ledger in every law. These stories matter because they map the monster we might yet unmake, connecting Gaul's girls to Gaza's, reminding that power's peace is often purchased in the plural, we the erased rising in ruin and resilience. What we owe is action in the aftermath, amplify the archives, fund the digs, teach the tablets in schools where history isn't heroics, but humans flawed fierce forever. Grapple with the darkness not to gloat, but to grok its gears, ensuring the machine rusts in recounting. If this stirred something, a chill like Rhine fog, a fire like Servia's stand, leave a comment below. What line lingered? What parallel pierced your peace? What question burns unasked? These threads, these grapples with the gloom, they forge the forge anew. That's how we hammer history from horror, ensuring it doesn't recur. If you hold that voices like Briga's, like Octavenia's merit the light subscribe, not for spectacle, but for the silences still sealed every forgotten fort, every faint inscription, every woman meant to fade, but fierce in refusal. The legions ruled for 5 centuries, erected a system, schooling every successor from Visigoths to viceroys, how to chain with smiles, exploit with edicts. The blueprint endures inked in blood and bureaucracy, but neither did their resistance. In the ogam of the wall, the hair's unyielding curve.